This is your friendly neighborhood author, Jonathan, and you are listening to Season 5 of the Floor Rejects podcast, The Isle of Artemisia. Welcome back to the Floor Rejects podcast. I am your friendly neighborhood author, Jonathan. If you are new here, every week I read a chapter of something I've been working on to you, and then I critique it and kind of go over what I like and what I don't like. I've been straying towards what I do like lately just to give myself a little bit of a break. But if you just missed last week or you're catching up, that was chapter 26, and basically what happened was Barrett bartered a deal with Nick to get him to bring the plant back to the others, and therefore give Nick some sort of power over Elliot to see if maybe he could make a play for some power himself. So that's kind of where we left off, but let's get into chapter 27. Chapter 27, Catch and Release. Elliot snickers, obviously not taking Nick seriously. He picks up a frond of the limp, loose plant. He inspects the roots, then tosses it back to the ground. He motions for someone to come and gather the plants. A woman steps forward, gathering up the plants gingerly. She carries them off, back into the woods in the direction that the others had seen them come from. She will plant them, and we will pray that they grow, Elliot says. Barrett looks at him intensely. He was a beautiful man, but his face was contorted in a horrific sneer. He pulls forward, stepping to Nick. "What will you do to get this power?" Elliot asks insincerely. Nick steps forward. Their noses are almost touching. "I'll take it," he whispers, so quietly that Barrett can barely hear him. He then rears back and headbutts Elliot. The man stumbles away, shocked. He grabs his head, groaning. "Seriously? This is your plan?" Elliot laughs. A trickle of blood is dripping from his temple. Nick smiles, his grin splitting his handsome, weather-beaten face sinisterly. "This is my plan," he says, and he snaps his fingers. 4 men step forward, gripping Elliot by the arm, shoulder, and head. Elliot scoffs. "You think you can just take this group on? You and your friends? Betrayers?" Elliot spits the question out. The man holding his head jerks his face towards the ground in a show of forced submission. "You have been in charge too long, Elliot. You mismanage us. You treat us like idiots. I'm tired of it. We are tired of it, aren't we?" Nick yells, spinning in a slow circle, looking around at his fellow island dwellers. Slowly, each of them, save for a couple, step towards him in a show of support. Elliot growls a warning. "You will not win this game." His voice is low and angry. "Get rid of him," Nick says emptily. The other men holding Elliot march him towards the deep pits they had dug into the ground. They throw him unceremoniously into a pit, and he lands at the bottom with a wet thud. "I'll get my place back. I will," Elliot shouts from the pit. Barrett turns to Nick. "You got it. You got what you wanted. Will you free Anaxos like you promised?" Barrett asks. Nick smiles. He snaps again, and the others toss a grill down over Elliot's pit before marching over to another one. They take the grill off of it, and together all 4 of them reach their arms down into the hole. After a few moments, Anaxos comes scrambling out of the ground, dirt smeared over his clothes, chest, and face. He rushes to Barrett, kissing him passionately. "How did you do this?" Anaxos asks breathlessly, looking deep into his eyes. "I bargained for your freedom. From Nick," Barrett explains. A small chuckle comes from Nick. "He's quite the haggler, Anaxos," Nick says. Barrett turns to him, smiling broadly. "Thank you, Nick," Barrett says. And Nick nods. "Are we free?" Anaxos asks, and Barrett then nods. They begin to cautiously walk away, looking around with suspicion, and just as they're about to clear the tree line, Nick clears his throat. "Not so fast, Barrett. You arranged for Anaxos to go free, but you never said anything about yourself," Nick says, turning and smiling that evil smile again. Barrett stops, his blood running ice cold. Nick takes a deep breath. But I know that he would just come back for you, so I propose a deal. Nick drags this sentence on too long to mean anything good. Barrett sighs. He was tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of the back and forth. He looks dejectedly at Nick. He was now at the man's mercy, not Elliot's. What? Barrett asks with little other than pain in his voice. I would like you to deliver the plants to us once every 3 days. Anaxos will show you how to harvest it, Nick says. Barrett shrugs, looking to Anaxos. The taller man is concerned, but nods slowly. That's it? Barrett asks. Nick nods. That's it, he confirms. Barrett agrees, and then without issue, they're able to walk out of the encampment and back towards the beach. They don't speak. Both of them are so drained of energy from all the adrenaline. They stumble back onto the beach, and Barrett almost collapses in relief into the sand. You are brave, Anaxos murmurs, laying down in the sand with him, an arm over Barrett's shoulders. Barrett smiles. A sudden peace washes over him, even as he looks over at the burned-out husk of the hut. I just wanted you back with me, Barrett says quietly. Anaxos hums, getting up after a few moments. He shuffles off into the forest, and Barrett rolls over, letting the sun beat down on his face. He was calm. Elliot was in a hole in the ground. Nick was being remarkably cool-headed about the whole escape. Birds chirp, and the waves splash on the beach for a long time, eventually lulling Barrett into a deep black slumber nuzzled in the warm sand. Barrett dreams of Greece. He dreams of walking on paved roads. He remembers the warm beer and delicious food. In his dream, he makes his way down the streets of a small village, smiling as Daniel and Crystal walk beside him. The strange thing was, Anaxos walked beside him too. He turned to Anaxos in the dream. The man grins at him, a t-shirt stretched across his taut frame. Barrett laughs at nothing and pulls Anaxos in, kissing him sweetly as dogs bark and people talk around them on the street. He wakes suddenly as a loud sound enters the dream, one that breaks his REM cycle and causes him to lean up with a start. He looks over to see that Anaxos was back in real life, and he's pulling branches apart, splitting larger ones over his knee as the sun begins to sink lower in the sky. Barrett can feel the mites from the sand beginning to move in the warm granules. He'd been still too long. He climbs up and dusts himself off. He walks to Anaxos. What are you doing? He asks. Anaxos smiles at him, not the grin from his dream, but a sweeter, sadder smile. A bed, he says, and Barrett recognizes the frame coming together. He looks to the burnt-out hut. It was probably unsalvageable, but he goes to it, trying to clear out the burned remains and charred logs. Then, once he had tossed out all the wood and fronds that were left, he was standing in a half-opened, blackened hut. He goes into the woods and collects more branches and fronds from the ground and then brings them back out. Anaxos laughs lightly and Barrett giggles. He was trying to be helpful. He throws the branches over the top of the hut, or what was left of it, and slowly the hut becomes re-enclosed. It was lumpier and less watertight than it had been before, and certainly there was more light seeping in, but it was something. You tried hard, Anaxos says as he drags in the rudimentary bed. He sets down on it, and it creaks. Barrett sits down next to him. They have nothing to talk about at the moment, so instead, Barrett lays down on the cot, and Anaxos settles in next to him. He puts his arm over Barrett, and they relax. They calm, laying back into each other. Both of them are happy. Barrett was happy not to be in a hole. Anaxos was happy not to be alone. Okay, what do I like about this chapter? One, what you've heard me say before. I like that something happens. I like that we're getting some resolution, some solution, some movement in the story. Anaxos was trapped, now he's freed. We've taken care of that. We have to keep in mind, or I'd hope that you would keep in mind, that this is a rough draft of a story. And so it's more than an outline, less than a finished product. And I say that so that when you think, it's weird that he was freed and trapped and freed and trapped all within like 2 days. That's crazy. Yeah, it is. And in I love it when my neighbors just hack and cough outside. Can you hear that? That's yummy. I would hope that over the course of revisions and adding and subtracting and trying to make the story whole, that, enough would be added so that it makes sense and it doesn't seem like we're just putting him in the hole and then taking him out of the hole and then putting him in the hole and then taking him out of the hole. I think this was his third time or second time being trapped by them. There was the first time, the second. Yeah, I think this was the third time. So let's not do it again. What do you say? Maybe we don't do it again. But I do like that something happens in this part of the story. Something is going on. I like that in this chapter, there's no sex. It's just a little bit of intimacy. Barrett kind of realizes that he's seeing his life more with Anaxos than without him. He's now imagining Anaxos back in Greece, back with him in the real world. And I think that that's a little bit shocking to him, that he's a little bit confused by that. Because this is kind of just supposed to be an island romance, and now all of a sudden he's imagining them walking down the street together. And I think that that serves to further strengthen their bond. It serves to complicate the story. It serves to make their relationship more complicated. And it makes the resolution either better or worse or messier depending on the outcome. That's kind of what I think I liked about this chapter. It wasn't a particularly long chapter or a short chapter. I think it was like 1,300 words. So I guess it's a shorter chapter. But I liked it. I think it gets us where we need to go. I think our next step is figuring out what the last kind of conflict is going to be on the island before eventually either rescue happens or death happens or whatever happens. When I write my stories, I tend to write them with a happy ending just because, I don't know, it seems better than a sad ending. Not that sad endings can't be fun too. I love a horror movie as much as the next person, but usually the person you're rooting for the most at least survives, or the person who deserves to survive survives. That's not really true, but you get what I'm saying. Like, by the end of the story, the person that you're rooting for usually survives. The final girl is usually someone you're rooting for, and that's kind of what I aim for. Other characters can come and go, they can die, they can disappear, they can show up, they can run off into the sunset, but at the end of the day, your final girls, your final characters do end up surviving. They don't always survive exactly how they want to survive, but they do survive. So that's kind of where I'm at with this chapter. I know I always ask for a little bit of grace and a little bit of understanding. Finally got through with my 2 weeks at my previous job, and I start my new one on Friday. So it might be a little chaotic here for a little while longer while I get through training and get through learning and getting through the processes, but I'm hoping that I can resume a sort of more normal schedule once everything kind of rolls through. But I appreciate you staying around, listening, even if they're short chapters and short discussions. Let me know if you like this chapter. Let me know if you didn't like this chapter. Tell a queer friend. I love queer people. I love queer people. Bring some more queer people around. Let's have a little queer community. Let's just talk about being queer. I'd like to experience more queerness so that my stories can be more well-rounded, but without writing somebody else's story, if that makes sense. It's kind of difficult because you want representation in the stories that you write. So you want to represent every type of character, but you also don't want to write someone else's experience, if that makes sense. And it's one thing to say that about like a movie or a TV show where there's a million people working on the project, writing the project. It's usually not just one person. And so you can kind of get some of that diversity and experience and creative vision from lots of different people of different walks of life. It's another thing when you're just one person writing a book. You only have your own experiences and the experiences that are shared with you, and even the experiences that are shared with you sometimes are not for public consumption. And so it's kind of hard to decide what you are or are not going to share. And so far, I've kind of just stuck to what I know. I'd like to expand my horizons. Of course, I'm always open to growing and learning and changing, but it's just kind of difficult. So I'm just, right now, I'm going a week at a time. I'm trying to finish this story, and then I've got 3 other outlines that I can kind of decide which one I want to go with next, if I want to go with any of them. And I think maybe, I don't know, I oscillate between the 2 extremes. I oscillate between this is my last season and then I'm done. And then I oscillate back to just keep doing what you're doing. Just keep doing what you're doing. You set out to make friends and find your people, and you just haven't found them yet. Or you found a few of them, but they're shy. They're a little shy, and that's okay. But you can tweet me at Floor Rejects on Twitter. You can email me, floorrejects@gmail.com, if you've got any questions, queries, concerns, thoughts, provoking, interesting things to say. I'm open to hear them. But until next time, I have been your friendly neighborhood author, Jonathan, and this has been the Floor Rejects podcast. Bye.